Welcome everyone to our SecureKey webinar. Our topic today focuses on how mobile app insecurity may be impeding your app's adoption and the 5 tips to unlock the value in mobile. At the end of the webinar today, we will have a Q&A session. You can also find our webinar presentation and the white paper we reference posted in the attachment section of the webinar channel. Dave Motti, our Director of Product Marketing, will be our presenter today. Over to you, Dave.
Thanks, Sarah, and thanks everybody for joining us. So without further ado, let's get started. Okay, so what we're going to be covering today, just a very quick agenda, is first off just talk about how it's not so easy to engage customers today. There's so many distractions, so many things going on, and it just makes your job so much harder if you're trying to drive adoption of your services, particularly with mobile. And then secondly, we're going to dissect, well, why? Why is that, why are people typically abandoning apps? Why are they not using them? And there's really kind of 3 key reasons we've boiled it down to. And then we'll end off with the 5 tips to unlock the value in mobile, a little bit of a conclusion, and we'll have some time for Q&A. So the reality is I'm not going to sell you guys on building mobile apps. I think, just by the virtue of you guys coming onto this webcast, you've likely realized the value of mobile. And we all know mobile is a very hot area where, consumers of all types of, demographics, around the world, everywhere, everyone is adopting mobile and they're adopting mobile services. But the reality is that there's so many distractions out there today. And, they say the average attention span of a user is around 8 seconds. Right? So if they're not going to get what they want from you within a very short period of time, they're going to kick you to the curb. And they're quite relentless at that. So, and you think about all of these apps we're all using, it's a very app-centric world, and it's really overloading users with all sorts of different apps. And you just think about your daily distractions. I know myself in building this deck, I had several, tweets that popped up. I had, obviously a lot of emails coming in, phone calls, text messages, right? Just all these distractions pulling you away from maybe the few things that you're trying to focus on. Well, that's no different for your end users or your consumers. They're, constantly being distracted, and unless you've got some value behind what you're trying to offer and a really good way of presenting it to them, they'll kick you to the curb very quickly. Right? So again, I said I'm not going to sell you guys on mobile because you guys should know it's growing and it's a hot area. And if you look, several years back, this was an advertising campaign that Apple put out where they're saying, thanks a billion, we've had over 1 billion downloads in just 9 months, right? So apps, everybody's doing it, and you should too, right? And now we look at kind of, just the order of magnitude as in terms of, app stores where we're at today, and Apple saying, okay, 1 billion thanks 25 times over, right? So now this is beyond comprehension of just the amount of downloads that have been done. But there's an interesting thing here. It really is there's a long tail distribution, right? So we've got these apps that are very widely downloaded, and then it kind of goes down to these apps that are typically never downloaded. They're very niche-y and they can be quite difficult to find. So this really poses some issues for you guys when you're trying to drive adoption. And I know it's coming on Halloween here, and this is kind of a little Halloween themed slide, but it goes along with the point we're trying to make. 60% of mobile apps out there just go straight to the dumpster or straight to the graveyard. They're never downloaded, right? So that's a huge statistic that you guys really should think about when you're building mobile apps. Secondly, 1 in 4 mobile apps are abandoned after initial use. Right? So if it doesn't offer value, users are very quick to kick them to the curb, and they go, again, straight into the graveyard. So the thing is, it comes back to, your typical philosophy with product launch is that they say that most products that aren't launched successfully typically never really gain as much momentum had they been launched successfully and gained adoption. So the same thing follows true with mobile. In fact, it's probably even worse, again, when you just think about how many mobile apps are out there. And the other thing is when you look at, the app stores, right? So we're looking at here, we've just got a slide that shows Google Play and the Apple App Store. Well, if you're not on the top charts, people, might not even find you. if you're not a featured app, if you're lucky enough to be a featured app or an editor's choice, you'll get some attention there. But again, there's that long tail distribution. If you end up in the long tail, hopefully you've created a nice little ecosystem or community where you've got, users that are downloading your app. But if you're trying to appeal to, broad consumers and a number of them, you really want to get on the top charts. And unfortunately, the search capabilities that are behind a lot of these app stores today aren't nearly what we have when we're, say, using Google to search the web normally. It's very difficult to actually find apps unless you really know what you're looking for or if it's on one of these top charts. So when you bring all this together, right, you really have to think about the statistics. So it's almost like starting a company, right? The statistics aren't in your favor when you're playing in this mobile landscape, right? So you need to think about that as you're building out your mobile strategy. Right, whether you're an optimist or pessimist, it's still good to think about, 60% and 1 in 4 are abandoned after initial use, right? And that just comes together with users being distracted and all of these other apps, right? So now it's like the most valuable real estate is getting on that first or second screen on their mobile devices. So let's talk about the issues, right? So one of the first issues that we're going to talk about is going to be poor value and functionality. So, I hate to do this, but I'm just kind of picking on Pizza Hut here. This is just, kind of when you go through the Google Play App Store, and I was just looking at reviews. So I'm not going to show you the review just yet, right? But you could think about what Pizza Hut could possibly do. There are some other pizza companies out there where they have mobile apps and they allow you to, build your own pizza. You can save your pizza on there. You can click on it and order it again. You can do all sorts of different things. So, there is some value that they can offer consumers. But, when you look at this, right, they got a review of 2.1. So they didn't really do all that well. And if you look at some of the comments, some of which I can't say because there was profane language, but, it loads slow, it doesn't work, and it doesn't have a good design. Right, so users will very quickly kick this to the curb. And if you think about this, if you're trying to drive adoption of your mobile app, and people see this review, because they'll look at the number, they may not even download your app. Right, they might say, "Wow, I got 1.5 out of 5. I'm not even going to touch it." Right, so that can really hurt your mobile app in the long run. And the question is should you release a mobile app if you don't believe you've got good functionality and good value, or just wait until you have that, right? So we'll talk about that. Extreme Labs did a really interesting report on, kind of mobile banking apps. And this is actually fairly recent. They have a few other reports on this kind of stuff, but this is just looking at the bottom 3 rated apps on iOS and on Android. And, they were just saying that, again, it comes down a lot to functionality, login issues, and some of these issues we're talking about today. But really the main point we're trying to drive home here is that once these apps are kind of launched, for example, Cooperative Bank, they've got 1.5 stars, and 88% of the reviews that are on there were all negative. So if they, fix the issues, that they presumably have, if they improve their mobile app, well, now they have a challenge of going back out to the user base and now proving themselves. So they likely have to invest in, kind of an outreach campaign to say, hey, those login issues, we fixed them, and those authentication issues, we fixed them, and now you can deposit more money and this kind of stuff. They have to then go back out and try and fix that and kind of fix that sentiment. So that's not an easy task. It's certainly much easier to launch something than it is to kind of go back and fix it. And that's really kind of one of the main points here. And this is from the same report, one of the quotes from one of the reviews from an end user or consumer. And they were saying, and this is particularly on the value, right, in the function. And it's saying, well, why is there a limit? Why is there a $1,000 limit on the mobile app? Most of my checks are over $1,000, and I want to be able to deposit that, so I'm not using this mobile app, right? And then they abandon it, and likely they're not going to use it again. And the thing that's even worse is that would this user move to another bank? Possibly, right? So that's the thing. Users can abandon you and they can move to other providers if you have competition, if there's other things out there. And this one, for me, really hit home, right? So this is from Ubiquity, particularly with travel applications. 35% of travelers who have an unsatisfactory mobile experience with a travel brand won't book again. So if you just say, hey, we need to get a mobile app out there just because, well, that's fine, right? I can totally understand that. Many companies have done that. But the question is could it potentially, do brand damage, right? If it has very, little value and it doesn't have good functionality, it crashes, there's login issues, you can create a lot of, really unsatisfactory experiences for people, and it can damage your brand. And, if you think about, depending on who you're targeting, right, especially if it's the upcoming generation where they're, just really taking a hold of mobile devices, why would they use you if you're a mobile bank that's, kind of known to not be mobile friendly? They're going to, flock to banks that are more mobile friendly or other services that are mobile friendly. So it can damage your brand if you don't have a good mobile experience. So the second issue is login issues and passwords, right? So in particular, passwords. I think in general, we are all frustrated with this anyways, mobile aside, but mobile tends to be a very sensitive spot. And the main reason is because frankly, it sucks putting in passwords in mobile devices. They weren't designed that way, right? When you've got keyboard swaps and you've got, all sorts of things, if you take an 8-character password that would be 8 characters on your PC, well, that could be 10 or 12 keystrokes on a mobile device because you've got keyboard swaps and you have all sorts of other things. And I can certainly tell you with experience, last week I was, I won't name the mobile app, but I was in a certain mobile app. I had to authenticate and I had to type in my my password. And I have a 4-year-old that was sitting next to me on the couch, and he was bumping me, and I nearly got locked out of my account because I had to enter it in like 3 or 4 times. So again, that you can take a little bit of bumps when you're entering something in on your keyboard, but if you're sitting on a bus or on an airplane and it's a bit shaky, it can be a little bit difficult to enter it in. So it's not, and again, you think about users and they're using all sorts of other mobile apps on their device and cloud services and everything. I mean, people are dealing with, 40, 50, 60 accounts, and unfortunately they're only typically using around 10 usernames and 10 passwords for a lot of these accounts. So there's a lot of issues with that. So overall, passwords suck. I don't think anyone can argue that. And the other thing is they're not very secure, right? So, if we look at this from Sophos, from Naked Security, there was a spam campaign that went out. If you were to click on the link, it brought you to the Red Cross Ethiopia site, right? So, and it was a legitimate site. So what they did, attackers typically do this to bypass web filters, is they will, they will hack or find a vulnerability in a legitimate site, and then they will, effectively inject a web page in there so that, if you click on an email and it brings you to the Red Cross's site, you'll actually be able to successfully browse there, and it won't get recognized as an illegitimate site. So you would go to this page and you would see this, and it would say, log in with your Google account. You type in your email address, your Google email address, your password, and boom, they've stolen your information. There are countless number of other campaigns that are like this, and actually a number of breaches that have happened. Many of them, this was kind of the tip of the spear that got a lot of these attackers into the accounts. Social engineering then coupled with kind of this website vulnerability, with web filter vulnerability and just end user, education and all of that, and you've typically been able to penetrate people's accounts. So, there's some serious issues there with passwords. The other issue is mobile insecurity and the impact, right? So there's a lot of press around how insecure mobile is and all this other stuff. So first off, mobile devices today are so much more valuable than they ever have been. Why is that? Well, we've got lots of personal information on there, PII. We've got social insurance, social security numbers. We've got our calendars on there, our emails, our financial information, biometrics, photos, and of course our passwords on there. And there's even more information that I'm not even naming. And we're carrying these things everywhere with us, right? So the information on these devices is extremely valuable, whether it's for personal, corporate, financial information that's on there. These things are valuable. So the attackers, they want to get access to them, of course. So this kind of causes there's 2 impacts that happen here. On one hand would be, say, for you guys, building mobile apps, right? So are you held back, right? Or should you give access to more services, right? If, say, you're considering doing mobile payments, right? Should you even consider that? Is it too risky to do mobile payments? Or is it too risky to roll out more services on mobile devices? So that's one thing that, you as organizations, as app builders need to think about. Is there too much risk? And then for the consumers, right? Should they trust your mobile apps, right? Should consumers, go ahead with mobile payments, or is it just too risky, right? Should they, put their lives in their mobile devices? So that's, that's kind of the question that comes up, and that's really the impact that has happened when there's all this media and the media hype. Let's actually talk about that media hype. So first off, the Federal Reserve has kind of, noted from all of this media hype and all this stuff that as adoption of mobile banking has increased, consumers are more likely to believe that the technology is unsafe, right? Because there's a lot of stuff going on. And if you look, this was actually it was late spring, early summer. Juniper put out a really good report on mobile threats. And they were saying, 600% increase in mobile malware, right? Same different author, other articles that went out at that time. 614% last year. Alarm bells should be going off. I guess we should all be standing away from mobile devices, right? Maybe we should be wearing quarantine suits when we touch mobile devices because I guess they're so bad, right? Well, when you actually double click on that report and you go through, I think, to the second or third page, it's kind of one of the last things on one of the pages. There's this quote from the same report that says, while the population of malicious mobile software is growing rapidly, it still remains a smaller threat than the threat to computers or your traditional laptops and desktops. Well, I guess it wouldn't have gotten as many clicks and it wouldn't have gotten so hot in the press had they opened up with that, right? So this is the one thing, right? Mobile devices have a better security posture than traditional PCs, desktops, and laptops. I know myself, as well as a lot of other IT security professionals, they're much more comfortable with doing their online banking and other high-value transactions on their mobile devices than they are, say, on their PCs. And that's just strictly based off of statistics and what's out there. We're certainly not saying that mobile is a silver bullet. And we're certainly not saying that mobile is perfect and impenetrable. There have been a number of attacks that have been documented, but the posture is certainly better. If you dissect that report even further from Juniper, excuse me, you'll note that typically some of these devices, they were Android-based, but they didn't use Google Play. They went to some illegitimate app stores, like some of these app stores that are based in China and Russia, which have been known to have a lot of malicious applications on them. People sideload applications. And then on the iOS side, where you see a lot of vulnerabilities is when you talk about jailbroken devices. So, there's almost a number of things you need to do in order to be vulnerable to these things in the first place. So that's the one thing that, we really need to think about with mobile insecurity. Yes, we need to think about security, but at the same time, mobile is actually a very good platform to conduct a lot of transactions. So let's kind of fast forward and talk about the 5 tips to unlock the value. So tip number 1, simplicity and convenience, right? So using your mobile app or even your web services, is it like this, right? Is it like doing a dog obstacle course where your consumer is the doggy running through the obstacle course? Are they jumping through hoops, running up ramps, and doing all this kind of stuff? Or is it like kind of walking a tightrope, right? Obviously very difficult, can be very frustrating, right? Is using your mobile app painful, right? Like getting your fingers trapped in mouse traps, right? So, overall it has to be easy. Going back to the top and what we talked about with, abandon rates and everything else, right? Again, 1 in 4 mobile apps are abandoned. If it's not simple and easy to use, people will kick you to the curb. And with mobile devices in particular, the point is quite strong, simply because if you take an iPad, for example, the user experience is very simple, right? I know my 2-year-old can use an iPad quite well, and he expects everything to be that way. When he goes to use a PC, I think he's quite disappointed to not be able to touch the screen, to not be able to just touch things and have things pop open as easily as they are, say, on the iPad. And if you're thinking about, say, the iPad or iOS, and you click on an app and you go in the app, and the app is, more of like a PC-like experience, or if it's just a mobilized version of your website, well, now you're asking people to have a leap of logic, right? From going from this simple UI to now a website that's really meant to be consumed on a PC. It just doesn't flow very well, and there's a lot of these apps again that end up becoming abandoned. So it's not easy. And the data is there, right? Credit Suisse, through doing user-based design, really focusing on user experience and UI, they reduced their website errors and their user errors by 50%, right? So putting more into the user, so the user can basically do everything on their own without any training. They just know where everything is, and which that in turn increased their usage, consumer usage, by 30%. Right, which they're able to monetize. So now you've got people coming on. It's very easy for them to do things. They don't need to think too hard about the services they're utilizing and transactions they're conducting. Right, so it led to an upsell rate of 15%, which can allow them to monetize about 2.5 times more. So the data is there. If you focus on that simplicity, you can drive more business. So the next point is, tip number 2 is increase trust and security. So we talked about that beforehand, and we're just going to drive into that even further. Obviously, if you have trust and security, you should be able to have higher assurance transactions, and you should be able to put more out there on the mobile channel. But there's kind of a few things that you need to consider. On one hand, we definitely want to say, coming from SecureKey, we advocate mobile devices, but obviously secure them. The other thing we advocate for is just make sure you know what regulatory compliance is. That if you're pushing a mobile app, if you decide to say, hey, we want to do mobile payments, hey, we want to do couponing, we want to do all this other stuff, we have to adhere by HIPAA or FFIEC. That means that we have some certain data privacy, data protection laws that we need to uphold. So all we would say is, as you're doing this, build your app with this in mind. Don't just say, hey, we're going to mobilize our site. Think about the future implications, right, and where you're going to be pushing it. And unfortunately, we talked about this up front, and I'm just going to drill into it again, because I hate this especially, and not just because I work for SecureKey. It's something I live and breathe every day anyways, and all my family members and all my friends. It's passwords are the main defense, main security mechanism of most mobile apps today. Sure, there's a lot of back-end stuff, but the stuff that most consumers experience are usernames and passwords, right? And there's several issues, right? Password reuse, right? And especially if you're going to make me write all these complex passwords and stuff, I'm going to write them down on a sticky note. We know they're easy to steal and crack. I showed you that one campaign. This is a screenshot from Tom's Hardware showing you those are actually what's in there are LinkedIn passwords, right? So that was when someone hacked into LinkedIn and they stole kind of all those passwords, and then they just used a cracker to kind of analyze all that information and spit out the passwords. And then, breaches everywhere, from LinkedIn to Twitter to PlayStation to Adobe to the recent one from Adobe. I know myself, I had my LinkedIn account was stolen. My PlayStation Network one was stolen. Luckily, there was a mitigation path, but that took a while, and it wasn't straightforward. And none of them have multi-factor authentication at the time. And the other thing is on the note of multi-factor authentication, is saying, well, hey, there are solutions out there today for multi-factor authentication. Well, the problem with this is that a lot of them weren't consumer-based. They were based in the enterprise. So these are the typical solutions that you find in an enterprise. And if you think about it, Dave Motti joins an organization and they say, Dave, here's your building access badge. Clip that onto your belt. And here is a token, that generates these numbers that you're going to need to log in to all of your services. Okay, well, as an employee, I have a few choices. I could either say to my IT department, I quit. I don't want to use these, right? Because that would be the only option. They would say, okay, well, then you can't access these services. You can't do your job. You're going to, we have to let you go, or you can quit on your own. As a consumer, though, however, if you're making me use one of these tokens, potentially, to log in, right? I have to back out, use a token, look at my keychain, do all these things. As we move more and more to a mobile world, this is technology that's decades old, right? And consumers they don't want to carry new stuff, and they don't want to use these things to do that, right? This is an enterprise-centric solution that's been trying to be pushed down to the mobile device. And this is what we see with Google Authenticator. Certainly we commend, Google's efforts in being able to do this, and I use it myself. But again, it's not as intuitive and as easy as it could be. And so many people that I know that would be, general consumers, they don't use it. They don't even know what it is. So that's the thing. So really it should be transparent, and a lot of these enterprise solutions, they aren't. This was a very recent one. Actually I just put this into the deck last night because it just popped up. Was Twitter's two-factor lockout, so a user's horror story. So Twitter rolled out after the Associated Press hack, which I won't get into the details. They rolled out a two-factor authentication. Actually, immediately after that, you saw job postings where they're trying to hire, authentication software engineers. So they built their own thing because that was kind of their mantra. Let's build our own authentication technology. So that's great. Well, this user actually had a really bad experience, and they got a new device, and Twitter didn't do a good job of actually building out an infrastructure where it could allow users to set up other trusted devices and say, hey, I don't have my Razr anymore, my Motorola Razr. I just got a new Moto X, and I want to take that one, take my old phone, make it an untrusted device, and I want to add a new device. Well, this user is saying, if you go through the article, it wasn't very intuitive, and he didn't have those capabilities to do that, and he was locked out of his Twitter account. And he, built up 1,500 followers, which is not an easy task to do. And he was, should I, start a new account, or what do I do? I'm locked out. And he said Twitter support wasn't very good. So again, hate to pick on Twitter, but it just shows kind of what happens, if you don't do multi-factor authentication right. And there's a number of things you guys can look at, right? So obviously usernames and passwords we talked about the issues. You could consider one-time password tokens, and a lot of banks do this today for high net worth, a lot of their wholesale customers or business customers. But the problem with one-time password tokens, they're very expensive. You actually have to physically mail them or get them to the end user. Very poor user experience. But on the flip side, they've been around for a number of years, and people get them. So okay, but it is to have to look at your keychain and do all this stuff. And at the end of the day, they're still subject to a number of attacks, particularly man-in-the-middle attacks. There's transparent, so this is, if you're going to rely on back-end fraud systems, certainly great. They're great things to leverage. But on their own, as a single solution, they still haven't really proven that they can stop a lot of the attacks today. Just relying on behavioral analytics and all this other kind of stuff. You still need something else behind there to allow the user in. There's text messages or SMS one-time passwords. This is typically what Twitter uses. Excuse me, I'm kind of fighting a cold here. But SMS one-time passwords. The problem with this is that there's been threats out there like Eurograbber and a number of documented attacks where attackers can steal the one-time password. They can do a man-in-the-middle attack on the text message channel, and they can pull that one-time password out and effectively render it useless. And again, the user experience isn't very nice. And then the last thing that's really starting to emerge is mobile SDKs, being able to build this in your mobile app natively. There's a number of ways to do it, but you have to look at, is it easy? Is it still easy to use? Is it easy for the end user? Are they still ultimately ending up having to enter in a one-time password? So there's a number of options out there. Ultimately, it comes down to usability. You've got to have the good security, but it really hits usability right in the face. So users are going to be quick to abandon the apps when they can't accomplish what they want to do, and they'll just kick you to the curb if they can't do what they want to do. Tip number 3 is bringing the channel experiences together. So for some of you, this might not be relevant, but it is if you have at least a website. But if we look at Apple, for example, this is an organization that has multiple channels or multiple customer touch points. So they've got, they have a call center, they have a brick and mortar store, they've got an online store, a website, they've got, the App Store, iTunes, there's kind of Apple TV, a whole bunch of channels that Apple uses to interact with their customers. Now, what's great with Apple, they've done a really good job of bringing those channel experiences together. A couple months ago, I had an iPod Nano that I dropped and the screen cracked. And I was able to log in online. I was able to schedule an appointment using my Apple ID, right? That kind of unifies all my devices. And then I was able to schedule a thing, and it said, yeah, at this location, this time, I went in, everything was all connected, met someone, they fixed my problem, and I got an email to the same account where I get my emails when I buy stuff on the App Store and everything else. It was a really good experience because everything was brought together. I didn't have to remember a new password to log in, to do all this other stuff, to check the invoice, to check the time. It was the same account, the same experience across all of these different channels. And that's really the thing that, certainly banks and retailers need to question is when they roll out their mobile strategy, is it done in silo? It shouldn't be, right? And there's some data behind that. eConsultancy saying that, Argos is actually able to, successfully increase sales by 29% by being able to have a multi-channel experience, right? I just think about the day where, for say a retailer, I can take my mobile app, I can go to maybe the retailer's site, and I can, maybe pick out a couple dress shirts and say, yeah, I want that in medium and large, and then I want that color, and I say, yeah, hold them for me at the store. I go in the store and they say, hi Dave, yeah, we've got your stuff ready. Would you like a change room to try them on? You go in, you try them on, boom, I buy them, it's done, right? And then they remember that for next time. So when I log in, they say, hey, last time you bought those couple dress shirts, we've got, these sweaters that are on sale. Would you like to come in and try them on, right? So I'm just kind of thinking off the top of my head. You can very well easily think that you can start to increase engagement and ultimately sales by doing this with mobile apps. So connecting the channels together. So really what we're trying to say here, if you look at this little kind of picture, it's a user and they're thinking, okay, well, with respect to banking, I touch my bank at the ATM, I touch my bank on my mobile app, and I touch my bank, in the brick and mortar, branch, and I touch them on the website. And if all of these experiences are different, if they all require different logins, different pins, different hoops to jump through, it can make it very frustrating for your customers. And really the strongest point here is if your competitors have done a good job in bringing these channels together, that word will spread fast, and consumers will start to move towards providers that have brought the channels together that ultimately give more function, more value. And this one's just a very quick one is be future ready. So mobile devices, I don't need to show you guys the statistics, but you guys know that mobile devices are growing quite rapidly. And the refresh rates are actually, quite daunting as well. I mean, people are switching their devices out. It used to be every 3 years, now 2 years, and some people even every year, even every 6 months, right? And it may not be their primary device, could be their secondary device when you're talking about people having multiple devices. So you have to be future ready. It's great to have, a mobile app that comes out today, but what happens when you go, oh man, we really should have thought about doing, a loyalty thing connected in our app. Now do we have to rebuild our app, right? So, you really need to think about all this stuff. Actually, Gartner has this kind of the way how they're looking at IT now and the whole world. And it's kind of mobile, social, cloud, and information or big data, right? And all these things are coming together. And we would just say, just think about the future when you're building your mobile app. How are things, especially in mobile, like biometrics, mobile payments, near-field communication technology, right? How are these things going to potentially impact your strategy, right? A number of organizations that we've talked to, they know NFC is taking some time, but a lot of people have a strategy for it, right? In fact, actually, most handset companies, they all have announced plans for NFC. The only one publicly that hasn't announced anything is Apple. Certainly, there's a lot of rumors going around. There's some patents that have been floating out there, but NFC is certainly something that's coming. But social, how can you tie into social? Is it appropriate for you to tie into social? Cloud, right? Cloud and mobile, it's a kind of a marriage made in heaven, right? You're going around, and it just makes sense that it's kind of all backed by cloud services. And then obviously big data, knowing what the data behind what consumers are doing and what your customers are doing. So just be future ready and have these things in mind when you're building out your mobile strategy. And the last tip is pick your development platform. Right? So Vision Mobile said, there's over 500 SDK startups that's alongside all of the incumbent IT companies that have been doing this for some time. So these companies are really there to help you, give you these toolkits to help you build these mobile applications. But here's the problem, right? There's a lot of these things out there, and you can't take it lightly, right? So Red Foundry is saying, the average annualized cost for a mobile app is around $300,000. That's to build it, QA it, and support it, right? So you can't just take it very lightheartedly. It's an investment. And as we said earlier on, if you don't do a good job, it can hurt your brand, right? And people will move on, and very hard to dig yourself out of that hole once you've jumped in, right? It's much, much better for you just to have a good strategy, good approach, good solid mobile app, and then you execute, you launch, and then you kind of roll out your other functions from there. But you guys have a daunting task, right? There's over 500 plus these SDKs. There's mobile enterprise application platforms. There's backend as a service. There's all sorts of different places to go, right? The reality is that it's actually much easier today to build mobile apps than ever before, right? So, but you guys have to answer a few questions, right? And we've experienced this when we've kind of gone out and talked to a number of companies. Are you going to build this in-house, or are you going to go to some mobile application development house to help you, right? And I know a number of companies that have done that to get them from 0 to 60. They then take the source code and everything, and they build it from there, right? You also need to think about the ease of integration. How easy is it for you to integrate into potentially your other services, especially when you're thinking about making it multi-channel? The other thing is you need to connect it to your mobile strategy. So it's great that a development shop can sell you on the idea of, hey, let's actually roll this out and we can build this for you. But you actually have to think about, does it connect to what your consumers want to do, where your consumers are going? What is your competition doing, right? And then the future capabilities, right? Maybe you guys are in a field that is so, so specific that it could be very hard for you to outsource to someone else. And maybe you want to bring it in-house, but then there's other tools that you're going to need to get from other people. And the last thing we would say, and this isn't just because we're coming from SecureKey, is that security really should be the foundation of your mobile app. Even if you've got a phased approach, it should be the first phase, because the thing is, if you build security in from day one, good security, it's much easier for you to then say, okay, well, in phase 2, we want to release mobile payments. In phase 3, we want to release, kind of authorizing these high-value transactions and everything else. It sets you up for that, and you don't have any messy situations, or at least mitigates the risk of, these messy situations of some of these breaches and everything that we've seen other organizations painfully have to go through. Right, so to kind of put all that together, those 5 tips really, make it easy for your end users, simplicity and convenience, increase security, and then you'll get their trust, right, and you'll get them to, be able to use more of your services, right, bring the channel experiences together. Don't just roll out a mobile app and say, okay, that's our mobile app and it has nothing to do with anything else, right, be future ready, think about the future and where things are going, right, like some loyalty companies out there are thinking about doing mobile payments because they want to convert points to cash and do all this other stuff. So a lot of these guys are already thinking about this, right? And then pick a platform as in terms of a development platform that is got some light integration that ties in with your mobile strategy, ties in with your internal systems, and just makes sense for you, right? And really just kind of very quick, just a little stuff just about SecureKey and why we know about this. We believe that when you look at all the stuff we talked about today, that the internet model is changing, right? The authentication model is changing in usernames and passwords. Because the thing is that, we are an advocate for strong authentication, but strong authentication, when you look at building mobile apps and engagement, is such a critical piece. It's the first thing users experience when they open most mobile apps. Please log in, right? The model has to change, right? User-centric wins. You can't come at this with an enterprise solution. It's got to be consumer-based, and it has to be focused on the user. They don't want to carry any new stuff, and they want to be able to do common authentication practices across all these services. And what we've seen in some of the things that we're doing, right, if you're able to do this by maintaining security and privacy, allow people to pick their credentials, allow people to bring their own devices, use their own devices, when they're logging into your services, right? So maybe if it's a bank or retailer, I walk into the retailer, I use my mobile device to pay for things, I use it to collect points, I use it for, for other added additional things. right? You can put more things in the hands of the end user. And kind of the last thing, just a little bit more about us, is that, we really do focus on these, consumer user problems, right? Bring it down to the user, bring your own device. We've kind of proven this with some of the stuff we're doing with the Canadian government, and that's more on the federation side. But that's on the bring your own credential, right? Again, focus on the consumer, allow them to pick a credential they're familiar with, right? And kind of, then rolling out the same philosophy to, kind of healthcare and expanding into other markets. So that's kind of a little bit about us, but obviously we strongly feel that all this stuff really does come together, and really with mobile being the tip of the spear across, a lot of these services, going forward. It's really the most appropriate place. And strong authentication, BYOD and BYOC are very critical elements to, kind of, unlocking the value in mobile. So with that, Sarah, I know we've got probably about 5 minutes left. I'll let you kind of field some questions.
Great. So Dave, I'm just going to pull up the questions here. And so our first question is it better to have an okay mobile app than none at all?
Okay, that's a good question. I mean, I think we would say, it depends. It depends on your overall strategy. I mean, the statistics we showed you would kind of say, well, if you're going to do that, make sure at least it doesn't give people a bad experience, right? And it offers at least some value. If you're just taking your website and mobilizing your website, that might not be the way to go. We would say, make sure when you go out, it's got really good value and make sure it doesn't crash. That's a good question.
Okay, great. What about how many devices per user are we seeing today?
It can vary, but I think we're likely saying it's anywhere from 2 to 4, right? So then you're talking about typically a mobile phone, a tablet, and in some cases people have maybe an enterprise. If they work for an organization that has distributed enterprise devices, they might have an enterprise device, they might have their own device, and they might have a tablet. So anywhere from 2 to 4.
Okay, great. Do you think we should allow jailbroken devices to access our services?
Well, that's a very good question. So I alluded a little bit to that when we were talking about the security. So, I mean, there's a lot of data out there that shows that, by jailbreaking devices, I mean, you really expose yourself to a lot of different types of threats. So it's certainly something that, you need to look at your risk profile and if that makes sense. But, it's something that, some organizations are fine with allowing their consumers jailbreak them and then access their services. Others might say no, or others might say, well, we'll take it in as a risk score. And if they're coming in on a jailbroken device, we're just going to ask them to jump through more hoops in order to authenticate. But that's a good question.
Okay. And our last question that we have here is, so it's obviously clear that authentication is a critical piece of the mobile experience. Does SecureKey actually have tools to help here?
Yes, actually we do. So we do have a platform called SecureKey Bridge.net Connect. And Connect really, we offer an SDK which allows organizations to embed strong authentication into their mobile application and do it with a very intuitive mobile-centric way where, users can have, devices, their trusted devices that they can then use to authenticate to your services. You can even have like little what we call a quick code, and the quick code could be used across multiple channels. So again, bringing the channel experiences together. So we do offer technology in this area that helps. And this is how we know about this stuff because we've experienced it and we've looked at it. And that's kind of one of the reasons why we commissioned the white paper that ties into this webcast in the first place. So yes.
Great. Okay, well, that's all the questions we have for today. So thank you so much, Dave, for taking the time to present this today. For further information, I just displayed a specific website you can visit to learn more about SecureKey's Bridge.net Connect solution. And if you have any questions, you can also email us at info@securekey.com. And as I mentioned earlier in the presentation, we have posted the slides that Dave presented today on our channel, as well as the white paper. Dave, do you have any further comments or closing remarks before we end our webinar?
No, I mean, I would say that's it. If you guys want further information, just go ahead and download the white paper. There's just more information that dives into some more of the statistics and talks more about what we discussed today.
Okay, and I actually have one last question if you have time to answer it. We just got this one in. How does SecureKey actually help make my mobile app better?
How does it make my mobile apps better?
Yes.
Yeah, so I mean, I would say if you look at what we talked about today, one of the key issues is, logging in and authentication, right? Users hate passwords and they hate having to remember them, especially if they're doing it over multiple channels. So one of the capabilities we provide is, certainly if you're talking about mobile, is allowing people to either just, have a trusted device where they open up their app and it's, this transparent authentication that goes on and just allows the user to connect to the service they need to connect to, or there's a little PIN code versus a, some long obscure password. And what's also cool is if organizations have multiple channels, they could use this, same mobile app. If a user's calling into a call center to, say book a flight somewhere, the agent can then say, hey, check the mobile app and enter in your, your quick code. Or if they're on their PC and they're, in a bank and they're doing something and it says, hey, check your mobile app and enter in this code. So we make it easier by allowing people to use, their own devices, which they can deem as one of their trusted devices, to kind of log into services transparently without having to go through this whole hassle of creating these long passwords, resetting passwords, and all sorts of things. So that's really the aim we go to make, bring security and convenience, and make it very user-consumer centric.
Great, awesome. Well, thank you so much again, everybody, and have a great day.